Alright, so we're gonna try something a little different with this video here. If you've been following this channel for a while, you know that we tend to talk about the ins and outs of the furry fandom itself, including how you can better find a home for yourself in it. But a thing I recently realized is that if you really boil things down, the furry fandom is just another collection of humans. Which means that there are a lot of topics on subjects that relate to just being a person in this world that have a pretty direct application to being a furry as well. One of the best examples of that crossover is financial literacy. You might not realize it at first, but if you think about it, the furry fandom has a very robust economy. Whether it's commissions, traveling to cons, or getting a fursuit, spending, saving, and managing money is a crucial part of being a furry. Which means, at least to me, it's worth talking about. And I want to start off our discussion by talking about a financial tool that not only has helped me keep track of my spending in this fandom in particular, but has also saved me a bunch of money without me having to do anything special. Let me explain. I know we just mentioned this, but it is true. There is a lot of money that gets moved around in this fandom. I actually find this fandom's relationship with money pretty interesting because it's such a core part of this community, yet it's not really talked about all that much. And I think that comes down to two reasons. One, especially here in the US, there is still quite a stigma on discussing money and finances as just a regular topic of conversation. And the reasons behind that could take up a whole video on its own, but in general, we tend to shy away from talking about money here, even if it would directly be beneficial from us from an equality standpoint. And two, and I think this is actually the bigger reason in the furry fandom in particular, financial literacy isn't really a thing that people are taught all that much. It's honestly part of the reason why I don't blame anyone for not wanting to talk about money, especially within the demographics of this fandom. A lot of us were never instructed on how to talk about it in the first place and are left to basically figure it out as we go along. Which I don't know, I think that's a bit of a shame if I'm honest, because managing money in particular can be a huge stressor, especially when it comes to managing it as a furry. So again, I don't want to blame anyone for not being comfortable with talking about it. That's where I come in. Now, there are so many topics that we could go over when talking about financial literacy in general, but I think there are a few that are helpful specifically for furries. Knowing how to invest and what the difference is between a 401k and a Roth IRA is very good information to know, but when it comes to money management as an anthro-animal enthusiast, it's not the most relevant information in the world. Again, when it comes to this community specifically, managing the money you do have is a lot more relevant to trying to make more or save for retirement, for example. But managing how you spend your money, that's important, and there are a lot of tools that are out there to help you do that. But I want to talk about one tool in particular that is genuinely beneficial to have in your financial toolbox, one that can help build great financial habits and literally reward you for doing so. And of course, I'm talking about credit cards, which I'm sure most of you watching have heard about or may be familiar with in some fashion, but let's still define what a credit card is and how it functions. Oh, by the way, this video and most of the videos I make on financial stuff are going to be very US based. Like, the general advice will still be relevant, but I'm an American and most of my audience is American, so if it isn't perfectly relevant to you, feel free to give something else a watch. But let's get back to credit cards. In fact, I'll show you one. These are small plastic cards that are issued by banks to allow you to buy things on credit. And it's that last part, buying things on credit, that trips people up because it's a weird word to describe something pretty straightforward. When you buy something on or with credit, it means you are using the bank's money to make that purchase instead of your own at the time of payment. So when you use a credit card, the bank allows you to borrow some of its money to make a purchase, and usually that's up to a certain amount, also called your credit limit. Now, this is very different from a debit card or a bank card. Like the name implies, those cards let you make purchases with money already in your bank account, so there's no sense of borrowing from someone else going on there. Now, just like when you borrow anything, it's your responsibility to give it back, and that's the same thing with the credit card. Usually every 30 days, the bank that your credit card is attached to will send you a statement with all of the things that you bought with that credit card throughout the month, and will give you a date by which you have to pay it all back. So if you spent $500 on a card in 30 days, at the end of those 30 days, you need to give all 500 of those dollars back. Now, that idea of paying what you borrowed back is the most important thing to know about credit cards by far, because this is the trap that so many people fall into when misusing these tools. When it comes to actually giving back all of the money that you borrowed, most, not all, but most credit cards do something very sneaky. They give you an option to not pay everything back all at once. And that's very deliberate. In fact, the banks don't want you to pay them back in full because that's how they make their money. Again, not all of them do this, but most banks will allow you to carry a balance on your card, meaning they'll let you borrow the money you already spent for longer than 30 days. But that comes at a cost, and when they do that, they will charge you interest, which can be seen as the cost of letting you hold on to borrowed money for longer than a month. And that interest, when it comes to anything financially related, is some of the worst in the industry. It's not uncommon to see credit card interest rates in the high teens or well into the 20s. So if we go back to our previous example, if a card's interest rate or APR is 20% and you only pay back, let's say, 400 of that 500 that you owe, each day you'll owe about 0.055 cents a day, or about $1.64 if you leave it for a month, on top of the 100 that you already owe. Now, that might not sound like a lot because I used a pretty low stakes example to make the math easy, but I'm sure you can see how bad that this could get over time. When you hear people say that credit cards are dangerous or scary, this is what they mean. Though I will say it's not really the cards themselves that are scary. Again, if you give back everything that you owe, you'll owe 20% APR on $0 left over, which is nothing. But it's that potential debt that you could rack up, and how quickly it can rack up is what's so dangerous about this tool. And again, this is how the banks make money. So you might see advertisements for cards that have something like 0% APR for X amount of months. That means that for the first X amount of months, they actually won't penalize you for not paying back everything that you owe. And they do that to get you used to not giving everything back until it's too late and you're suddenly hit with a 20% interest rate on that balance that you've been used to not paying. So at this point, you heard all of that, and I know what you're probably thinking. Who in their right mind would want to play this stupid game? And honestly, I don't blame you for thinking that in the slightest. These things can ruin your finances in just a few months. But as bad as their downsides are, not only can they be avoided, but many banks will reward you for using their credit cards, to the point where you could potentially get more outsized value than the money that you're spending on the card. A lot of credit cards these days come with rewards programs, which are built into the cards themselves and are split into two main categories: cash back and rewards points. The first one is a lot simpler. When you buy things with cashback credit cards, you get to keep a percentage of that purchase. It's very easy to find credit cards with 1 or 2% cash back. So if you spent $500 on a card with 2% cash back, at the end of the month, you will receive $10, which doesn't sound like a lot, but in most cases, this stacks over time indefinitely. Cashback doesn't expire, so you could just keep adding to that total every month for as long as you use the card. And cash is in the name. It's money you could use for any purchase on that same card. In fact, I actually met someone at the last convention that I was at in the dealer's den who said they were buying everything on the cash back that they got from their credit card, which means they didn't have to spend anything extra for the stuff that they were buying. Another way to think about this is that if you spend all of your cash back every month, everything you buy is effectively 1 or 2% off, which might help the math click in your head a little bit. So that's cash back. The second main category for credit card rewards is rewards points. Now, I will admit that these can get a lot more complicated depending on which rewards point system you are using, but basically you could think of a point as a store of monetary value. And to keep things simple, we'll just say it's 1 cent. The difference between cash back and point rewards is that those points can be used for more than just cash. Now, that's not to say that you can't, in many cases, use them as cash back in the same manner if you swap 1 cent for every point, but those points can also be used for other things, like travel. For example, most airlines also have a rewards system that uses points, but to earn them, you typically have to fly on those airlines, and fly a lot. But if you have a card that earns points and is partnered directly or indirectly with a specific airline, you could transfer your credit card points to those airlines and use them to pay for flights. This is the most common way that I use credit card points, and it works so well that I haven't paid full price for a flight to a convention in years, and in many cases I have enough points to cover the flight entirely. And again, there's an entire rabbit hole of how to maximize your points for the most value, but that would add at least a half an hour to this already pretty long video, so either send me a DM or sit me down at a con and I'll let you in on all of the secrets. But the main point is that there are actually good reasons to play the credit card game. In fact, it's one of the few ways in the US in particular that you can avoid getting scammed when it comes to something financial. But even that's not the only reason why I'm such a proponent of these tools. Credit cards also help with managing your finances in other ways that are particularly helpful in the furry fandom. First of all those statements that you receive at the end of the month list every single transaction that you make with the card. So when it comes to keeping a record of what you've been buying, it does all of that for you. Secondly, credit cards are an inherently more secure way to buy things. They're not cash, which once you lose, it's gone. But credit cards offer protections on your purchases that most debit cards don't have. This includes things like fraud protection, which, very similar to PayPal, if you buy something from a shady maker in this fandom, the money that you spend has a higher chance of coming back to you. Which makes sense, right? You're spending the bank's money, not yours, and banks want to avoid fraud as well. In fact, I've had instances in this fandom where I've paid for art, lost all communication with the artist, opened up a fraud case with my credit card company, and I got that money back the next day. And there's other higher level financial stuff that they help out with, like increasing your credit score if you're an American, but that's out of the scope of this video. Basically, paying off your credit card every month helps tell other potential lenders that you're responsible. That's pretty much all it comes down to. But like I've been stressing this entire video, these things are tools, and like any tool, they have to be used responsibly. At the core of using credit cards correctly is self-control. The number one reason why people don't use them is that they can't control themselves and borrow more than what they can reasonably give back. Even though it's not your money, the only way to not lose the game with the banks is to use your credit card like a debit card or cash and only spend what you know you can pay back. And if that's something that you can't guarantee beyond reasonable doubt, I actually implore you not to get a credit card. You will be absolutely preyed upon by the banks. Not only that, remembering to pay off your credit card every month is another thing to manage and remember. I put all my cards on auto pay because, again, I only spend what I know I can pay back. But if that's not something that you want to think about, then again, these might not be for you. And remember, the banks want to win this game, and they often do. So they will do all sorts of advertising tricks and talk in fancy language to get you to slip up just once with a missed or incomplete payment. Now, if you can read through all of that, it's pretty simple to avoid, but if that's an extra layer of stress that you don't want to deal with, then again, these tools might not be for you. But with all of that being said, I personally believe that the potential downsides are easily outweighed by the rewards and the added security that paying for things with credit cards offers. In particular, I think they make a lot of sense for furries as well. And there are a lot of ways to ease into getting used to paying for things on credit as well. Banks tend to know if you're new to credit cards, so for your first one, your credit limit usually won't be all that high, so you can start using them in moderation. I'm also a big fan of secured credit cards for beginners, where when signing up, you give the bank a security deposit that they can pull from if you miss a payment or can't pay in full for a month. That then acts as your credit limit and as a backup for those situations, since they'll just take from the security deposit before putting you into debt immediately. And honestly, for most people, you really only need one or maybe two credit cards, and even starter cards these days are pretty good. Discover, which is where I got my first card, has a really good cashback rewards program, and it also includes their secured cards as well, so you could get the best of both worlds. For a credit card where you could just get it and don't have to think about it, the Citi Double Cash is actually my go-to recommendation. It's 2% cashback on everything, and that's it. And getting one of the Chase cards, like the Freedom Unlimited or the Freedom Flex, gives you a good introduction into how rewards points works, and actually lays the foundation for a very powerful rewards deck of cards. And I'll link to all of these in the description so you can read more about them. And there's so much more that we could have gone into, but the main point that I want to get across is that, like any tool, there's no need to be inherently afraid of credit cards. Sure, they require a certain level of responsibility to use them, and if you cannot guarantee that you can use them responsibly, then yeah, they should be avoided at all costs. But if you do have the discipline needed for them, they can be very beneficial to use when participating in the furry fandom economy. From helping you getting just one more art commission in a month with your cash back to potentially flying you across the country for a con for free, credit cards can be an excellent way to help manage your furry finances. Plus, I don't know about you, but there's just something about not falling victim to the trap set up by big banks in this country that just feels pretty good inside. But anyway, that's been it. Again, I'll have all the cards for beginners that I suggest linked below, and if you have any questions, please leave a comment and I'll help clarify things for you. But for now, thank you for watching. I'll catch you in the next one, but until then, stay wild out there. Peace.